Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper is the name the Victorian press gave an unknown killer who lurked London's East End in 1888. In the cramped streets and alleyways of Whitechapel, at least 5 women, also known as the Canonical Five, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly, were murdered between late August and early November. Their throats were cut. Several suffered brutal abdominal mutilations. The speed with which the killer slipped away into the night terrified London. The newspapers whipped up a sensation. A letter sent to a news agency and signed Jack the Ripper fixed the moniker. Another, the notorious From Hell letter, posted to George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, arrived with half a human kidney, deepening the horror. Scotland Yard flooded the district with constables, took witness statements by the hundred and pursued leads from doctors, butchers and dockers alike. Forensic science was in its infancy and hence no fingerprint database. No forensic procedures were available which would help trace the actual killer. Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren was widely criticised and resigned amid the furore. As for who he was, theories range from local labourers to sailors, barbers and physicians. A modern DNA-based claim has pointed to Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant, but the methods and conclusions remain contested. What is certain is that the killings ceased as abruptly as they began. Beyond the enduring mystery, the case exposed grim truths about Victorian poverty, violence against women and inadequate urban policing. It also nudged British policing forward, prompting better record-keeping, revised patrol strategies and the slow but steady rise of forensic methods. More than a century on, the Ripper remains a disturbing intersection of crime, media and myth in British history. Harold Shipman, GP turned killer. Harold Shipman was a general practitioner in Hyde, Greater Manchester, and the most prolific convicted killer in British history. Between 1975 and 1998, he murdered patients, mainly elderly women, by administering lethal doses of diamorphine, then falsified notes and death certificates, often steering families towards cremation. An early red flag came in 1976. While working in Todmorden, Shipman was found addicted to pethidine and convicted of obtaining controlled drugs by deception. After treatment, he returned to practice and later set up as a GP in Hyde. The case that exposed him was the 1998 death of Kathleen Grundy, a healthy former mayoress. A typed will leaving her estate to Shipman triggered her daughter, solicitor Angela Woodruff, to contact police. Exhumation revealed morphine in Grundy's system, and investigators found Shipman had backdated computer records. At Preston Crown Court in January 2000, he was convicted of 15 murders and 1 count of forgery, and given a whole-of-life tariff. The subsequent Shipman inquiry concluded he likely killed at least 215 patients, possibly 250 plus, and recommended reforms, tighter controlled drugs monitoring, improved death certification and cremation paperwork, and stronger GP appraisal revalidation and medical examiner oversight. Shipman died by suicide at HMP Wakefield on the 13th of January 2004. His crimes reshaped safeguards in the UK primary care and coronial care processes. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. Peter Sutcliffe was an English serial killer and former lorry driver who murdered 13 women and attempted to murder 7 more across West Yorkshire and Greater Manchester between 1975 and 1980. Victims were attacked at night, typically with a hammer and knife, and the crimes centred on Leeds, Bradford and nearby towns. The investigation became one of the largest murder inquiries in British history. In 1979, detectives were misled by the hoaxed letters and cassette from Wearside Jack, which pushed the inquiry toward a Sunderland accent away from viable suspects. Sutcliffe, outwardly ordinary and married, was interviewed by police 9 times during the hunt but not detained. On the 2nd of January 1981 in Sheffield, officers stopped Sutcliffe over false number plates. He was taken into custody. A hammer and knife linked to the attacks were recovered shortly afterwards. He soon confessed. Sutcliffe was convicted of 13 murders and 7 attempted murders and given 20 life sentences. In 2010, the High Court set a whole life order, removing any prospect of release. The case prompted scrutiny of major inquiry management, the handling of vast lead volumes, and attitudes towards victims. Sutcliffe died in prison in 2020, aged 74. Fred and Rosemary West, House of Horrors. Fred and Rosemary West murdered at least 12 women and girls between 1967 and 1987. Many offences centred on their home at 25 Cromwell Street, Gloucester. Victims included family members Charmaine West, Fred's stepdaughter, killed in 1971, and Heather West, 1987, as well as lodgers and young women such as Lucy Partington, abducted 1973. Remains were buried at Cromwell Street and at other sites linked to the couple. The case came to a head after concerns about Heather's disappearance. In February 1994, Gloucestershire Police began excavations at 25 Cromwell Street, uncovering multiple sets of human remains. Fred West was charged with 12 murders. He died by suicide at HMP Birmingham on the 1st of January 1995 while on remand, so never stood trial. Rosemary West was tried at Winchester Crown Court later in 1995. She was convicted of 10 murders and received a whole life order, no parole. Cromwell Street was subsequently demolished. Key outcomes included scrutiny of missing person procedures, multi-agency information sharing, and inner force cooperation in major inquiries. The West's crimes remain among the most serious in modern British criminal history, a 2-decade pattern of murder concealed behind an ordinary terraced house, exposed only when a missing person lead prompted a full forensic search. Ian Brady, Moore's Murders with Myra Hindley. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley abducted and murdered 5 children in 1963 to 1965 across Greater Manchester, with bodies buried on Saddleworth Moor. Known victims were Pauline Reed, 16, John Kilbride, 12, Keith Bennett, 12, Leslie Ann Downey, 10, and Edward Evans, 17. The inquiry began in earnest after Edward Evans was killed at 16 Wardlebrook Avenue, Hattersley, on the 6th of October 1965. Hindley's brother-in-law, David Smith, alerted police, leading to arrests. Key evidence included photographs of the moor and a tape recording of Downey which linked the pair to earlier disappearances. In 1966 at Chester Assizes, Brady was convicted of 3 murders and Hindley of 2 and a harbouring charge. Both received life sentences. In the 1980s, further confessions tied them to Reed and Kilbride. Remains of Reed and Kilbride were discovered on the moor in 1987. Keith Bennett's body has never been found, despite repeated searches and appeals. Brady spent decades in secure hospitals, latterly Ashworth, and died in May 2017. Hindley remained imprisoned until her death in November 2002. The case prompted reforms in major incident management, victim support practice, and the handling of large volumes of leads. It remains one of the most scrutinised investigations in British criminal history, with ongoing efforts to locate Bennett's resting place. Dennis Nilsen, the Muswell Hill murderer. Dennis Nilsen, often called the Muswell Hill murderer, was a Scottish-born former soldier, ex-police cadet, and later civil servant who killed at least 12 young men and boys between 1978 and 1983. Most victims were picked up around North London pubs or met near transport hubs, often men who were homeless or passing through. Nilsen killed in his Cricklewood flat, 195 Melrose Avenue, and later at 23 Cranley Gardens, Muswell Hill, typically by strangulation, sometimes with drowning, then kept the bodies for periods before dismemberment. Remains were disposed of by burning at Melrose Avenue and at Cranley Gardens by attempting to flush parts into the drains. The case broke on the 9th of February 1983 when a diner rod worker found human remains blocking the drains at Cranley Gardens. Police attended, searched the flat, and arrested Nilsen. He gave detailed confessions covering multiple killings. At the Old Bailey in 1983, he was convicted of 6 murders and 2 attempted murders and sentenced to life imprisonment, later treated as a whole life term. He died in prison in 2018, aged 72. The investigation highlighted the vulnerability of homeless and young LGBTQ+ men, improved major inquiry management and scene processing in domestic settings, and remains one of the UK's most studied homicide cases for its forensic and investigative lessons. The Grandpa Gang. The Grandpa Gang of London, better known as the Hatton Garden Crew, carried out the Hatton Garden safe deposit burglary over the Easter bank holiday weekend in April 2015. Mostly in their late 50s to late 70s, the team entered via a lift shaft, then drilled a 50-centimetre hole through the vault wall with an industrial Hilti DD350 and ransacked 73 safe deposit boxes. Estimated haul up to £14 million. Only about £4.3 million has been recovered. Police arrests followed in May 2015 after surveillance pieced together meetings and movements. In March 2016, at Woolwich Crown Court, core members John Kenny Collins, age 74, Daniel Jones, 60, and Terry Perkins, 67, were each sentenced to 7 years. Brian Reeder, 76, received 6 years, 3 months. Associates William Lincoln got 7 years, Carl Wood 6 years, while Hugh Doyle received a suspended term. Confiscation orders later sought tens of millions. One fugitive figure, alarm specialist Basil, was identified as Michael Seed and convicted in 2019, receiving 10 years imprisonment. Perkins died in prison in 2018, shortly after a £6.5 million payback order. Decades after their prime, the men dubbed Dad's Army proved organisation and patience could still breach a modern vault, but large portions of the loot remain untraced, keeping the case alive in Britain's crime law. The Kray Twins, Ronnie and Reggie Kray, East End gangsters. Ronald and Reginald Kray, born 1933, Hoxton, East London, led The Firm, a criminal organisation that dominated parts of the East End and West End in the 1950s and 1960s. Their rackets included protection, armed robbery, and control of clubs and gambling. They cultivated celebrity contacts and a public image that masked violence against rivals and associates. Key murders defined the case against them. On the 9th of March 1966, George Cornell was shot dead by Ronnie Kray inside the Blind Beggar pub in Whitechapel. In October 1967, Jack "The Hat" McVitie was killed in a private flat after a dispute over a failed contract killing. Evidence pointed to Reggie Kray as the principal attacker. These killings, together with witness statements gathered by Detective Superintendent Leonard "Nipper" Reed, broke the climate of fear that had protected the twins. Arrested in May 1968, the Krays and several associates were tried at the Old Bailey in 1969. Both twins were convicted of murder and received life sentences with a 30-year minimum recommendation, then among the toughest tariffs issued in England and Wales. Ronnie was later detained at Broadmoor Hospital and died in 1995. Reggie served time in multiple prisons, was released on compassionate grounds in 2000 with terminal cancer, and died the same year. Their downfall marked a shift in policing of organised crime in London and ended an era of high-profile gangland influence over nightlife and protection rackets. Mary Ann Cotton. Mary Ann Cotton, 1832 to 1873, was a Victorian poisoner from County Durham, widely suspected of killing up to 21 people, husbands, lovers, stepchildren and her own children, primarily using arsenic. Born Mary Ann Robson in Low Morsley, she worked as a dressmaker and domestic before a sequence of marriages and relocations across the northeast. Her first husband, William Mowbray, died in 1865 after several of their children succumbed to gastric illnesses. Her second husband, George Ward, died in 1866. In 1867, her mother, Margaret Stott, died suddenly after Mary Ann's visit. A third partner, James Robinson, dismissed her amid suspicions of theft. She then married Frederick Cotton in 1870. He died in 1871, as did her lover, Joseph Nattrass. The pattern was similar: sudden stomach complaints followed by death, life insurance policies, or financial gain, and rapid moves to new households where further deaths occurred. The case finally unravelled in 1872 with the death of Charles Edward Cotton, Mary Ann's young stepson. Parish official Thomas Riley refused to sign the burial paperwork, suspecting foul play. An autopsy found arsenic. Police arrested Cotton, and investigators re-examined earlier deaths linked to her. Tried at Durham Assizes in 1873, she was convicted of the murder of Charles Edward Cotton. Contemporary accounts cited similarities across multiple deaths, but only one charge was pursued. Mary Ann Cotton was executed at Durham Jail on the 24th of March 1873. Her case accelerated public interest in toxicology, tighter control of poisons, and reforms in death registration, insurance oversight, and coronial practice, becoming a textbook example of how Victorian household poisons could be used to lethal effect behind an ordinary facade. Charles Sabini. Charles Darby Sabini, a Londoner of Italian parentage, led the Sabini Gang, the most powerful racecourse protection outfit in Britain during the 1920s to 30s. Working out of Clerkenwell, he organised large crews to protect bookmakers at meetings from Epsom and Ascot to Brighton, turning the street betting act's grey market into a lucrative protection and extortion system. Violence, razors, coshes, ambushes kept rivals and reluctant bookies in line. Sabini's men fought turf wars with the Birmingham Boys, Billy Kimber, the Elephant and Castle, and Hoxton mobs. By the mid-1920s, he was widely regarded as the king of the racecourse gangs. The network expanded into pubs, clubs, and doormen, with bribery and intimidation insulating operations. Police raids brought periodic convictions for assault and affray, but never dismantled the organisation. His downfall came with changing policing and the Second World War. Classified an enemy alien because of his Italian background, Sabini was interned in 1940, severing control of his rackets. After release, he lived quietly on the south coast and died in 1950. Why is he counted among Britain's most notorious criminals? Industrial-scale racketeering, organised violence across multiple countries, and a near-decade of dominance over the racecourse underworld, an empire that set the template for later protection gangs. That's all from your British Explainer, mate. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more interesting British stuff. Till then, have a good one.